There is a solution for that is sponsored by VARC Solutions. VARC Solutions helps small businesses succeed by delivering expert QuickBooks bookkeeping, consulting, quick-base development, and integrated solutions. If you own a small to medium-sized business that uses QuickBooks or QuickBase, the experts at VARC Solutions can help. In business since 1999, with people who care and the knowledge and experience to solve your toughest problems. Visit varcsolutions.com for all your QuickBooks needs. Welcome back to another edition of There's a Solution for That, where we help small businesses succeed by discussing challenging business problems and best-in-class solutions. All right, welcome everybody to the latest edition of There's a Solution for That. As always, we've got great guests to come onto our show and really talk about some really significant problems that your everyday small, medium-sized companies are dealing with and the solutions that apply to those problems. And so our guest today is Laura Cumbridge with Avalara. By the way, Avalara is one of our amazing partners. We've been working with Avalara for years and love them, and as well as the Avalara team. So just kick it over to you. Laura, just kind of do your intro.
Sure. Thanks, Brad. And thanks again for having me. And hello to everyone out there. I hope everyone's getting ready for Christmas and having an awesome day so far. So just to give you all a quick introduction of myself, again, my name's Laura Cumbridge. I'm one of our senior sales executives here at Avalara. I've been with the company for almost 4 years. I focus on small to mid-sized companies on our small business team. And I also focus on our QuickBooks and Sage 50 clients, but I work with a ton of other different platforms and ERPs that my customers are working with as well. But just to give you a little bit of insight there. And I work a lot with our partners, and VARC is one of the main partners that I work with. And we just help clients get up and running with our sales tax compliance software and really just get sales tax compliance in general taken off of businesses' plates so they can focus on other areas of the company. So.
Perfect. And yeah, like I said, love working with you and the rest of the team at Avalara, and you guys just do such an incredible job of supporting us and our clients. So really love the partnership we have. You mentioned something that I didn't really have on my list of things to ask you, but let's go ahead and dive into it. We're going to be talking about sales tax, which is so super fun for most people, right?
Yeah, right.
I think one of the things that I want to make sure people understand too is, we're very QuickBooks centric here, but Avalara as a solution to sales tax is so much bigger, right? I mean, you have thousands of ERPs and software integrations that you work with. And so you had mentioned Sage 50, Sage 100. And so just tell us just a little bit about that, like how connected is Avalara?
Yeah, that's a great question, Brad. So Avalara is very proud of the fact that more than 1,400 software companies have chosen us as their certified software provider, and we partner with those companies. So we actually have more than 1,400 pre-built connectors, as we call them. Essentially, just that means that we have a pre-built integration to all of those different companies where we're directly connected to their software platform. So we come in and just take over all of the sales tax components. And just to give you a little bit of perspective, there's a lot of other companies out there, but most of them have maybe 20, 40 partnerships or connections. So I think that's due to Avalara's experience in the industry, right? Avalara has been in business for more than 20 years. This is actually our 20th year. And we have more than 40,000 customers, and those companies really just put their trust and faith in us, given our reputation and our direct relationship with all of the states. So, and we also have our API integration. So even though there's 1,400 pre-built connections, we can connect with mostly any system out there. So.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. Yeah, and so we of course we're partners with you guys, but we're also a customer. We use your solution, so we know it works, and we know it's amazing, especially with the QuickBooks integration that we use. But yeah, the fact that you guys are integrated with accounting softwares, Shopify websites, Magento websites, all those things that just lots and lots of companies are using every day, really makes it an easy solution to choose. So we'll talk a little bit more about that, but let's do the 30,000-foot view. Like, why do you guys exist? Why is sales tax so hard, and how are you guys solving that problem?
Yeah, I can definitely answer that, Brad. So we have these funny little stickers in our office, right? And there are these little skulls, and they say there's only two things in life that are inevitable: death and taxes. And it's so true, right? Because every company has to deal with sales tax in some way, shape, or form, but nobody really wants to. It's a pain. And in the US, they've just made it very complicated for businesses to handle sales tax. And that's because every state in the US has different rules, right? Every state has different sales tax rules around what's taxable, what's not taxable, what should the rate be. Each state has tens of thousands of different local level taxing jurisdictions. And to add to the complexity there, those rules are constantly changing, right? So if you don't have some type of partner like Avalara or an automated solution in place, there's not really any way for any person to really know what all those rules are, which is why we partner with thousands of CPAs and accounting firms, things like that, right? Because even the tax professionals who went to school for these types of things, they still aren't able to know every rule and jurisdiction across the country. So that's where we come in, and we're able to connect to the state's databases. We're able to keep up with all those rules in real time, and it's just automated through the software. So there's no person. You don't have to worry about the manual risk of compliance. Everybody's human. Everyone makes mistakes, right? But with software, you don't really have to worry about that. So that's where we come in and automate that process.
Yeah, no, that's great. In fact, I was working with a client just the other day was not using Avalara, and they're dealing with North Carolina. Just, I mean, out of the many states that have complexity, they happen to be in North Carolina, and we were helping them do it like file the return. And during the file return process, it's one thing to say, here's my sales in that state, but then it was like, okay, yeah, I know, but how much was in this county, in this county, in this county, in this county, in this county?
Oh,
And
yeah.
it's like, I mean, I have an address. Do I have a county? No, probably don't. So, I mean, just the sheer volume of transactions and complexity that if you were trying to do this on your own would be just incredibly challenging. And I talk to folks that are like, oh, hey, my thing is pretty simple. I just deal in one state, not a problem. But I think more and more, it's not just a one state problem. And so maybe tell the whole audience just a little bit about how sales tax has sort of gotten more challenging over time and why it's not just a one state problem if you happen to sell products or services in a given state.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So it kind of goes back to what I just talked about with the complexity of sales tax, right? But every state's going to have different rules with how they handle sales tax. And you were talking about all the different rates involved. I have seen invoices for my clients, just as an example, in Colorado, where there's 6 or 7 different sales tax rates on one invoice. Some counties and
Mm.
states have science tax rates, special tax rates. I've heard every name of a sales tax rate under the sun, right? And that's what makes it so complex. And you have to look at what you're selling, right? I'll give you a perfect example. A t-shirt could be taxable in New York at a certain percentage, but in certain counties, if it's less than $100 in value, it's not taxable, or vice versa. You have a Twix bar that's taxable in some states and it's not in others because it contains flour. Take that and look at the broader scope of things with billions of different items and services being sold in the US. Think about how complex that's going to be with how different all of those things are taxed. And then again, all the rules are constantly changing. So you just want to make sure that you're charging the correct sales tax rate and those percentages are accurate, because if you're not doing that, of course, it puts the business at risk for certain things like an audit and things like that. So.
Right. Well, I know back in the day, so I'll date myself here, but back in the day, many years ago, I could be selling, I could have my office in Texas or Colorado or wherever I happen to be. And if I'm selling a product and shipping it to New York, typically, again, very long time ago, right? It was, oh, unless I'm shipping to somebody in my state, it's not taxable. But I think that's changed, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's a perfect point on just talking about the general complexity of sales tax, because not only do you have to worry about all the different taxation rules, but what most of the states look at is what the states call nexus. So you have physical nexus and economic nexus. And I think we're going to dive into that a little bit further here in a moment. But Now the states will look at this and say it is based on where you're shipping to or where you're billing to, right? So if you have a company that's based in Arizona, it's not as simple as it used to be, like you mentioned, Brad, where you would just charge an Arizona sales tax rate for everything or it's not taxable. Now they're looking at the bill to ship to address on every invoice. So if you have an e-commerce site, for example, you never know where people are going to be purchasing from, right? It could be every single state out there.
Right.
You need to determine what that state's tax rate is based on the bill to ship to address. Or what if it's not a tangible product? Then they're going to look at the bill to address. So there's all these different layers that just makes it very confusing. And you throw in things like drop shipping, or is your customer exempt? Do they have an exemption certificate? That's really what's changed over the years with the nexus thresholds and guidelines. Do you have an employee in a specific state? A lot of companies don't realize that if you have an employee, that could possibly trigger physical nexus and sales tax obligations. So you really just have to either be familiar with or have a partner like Avalara to determine how that should be taxable and what those rates should be.
Right, and I think I've even, talked to folks that are like, "Yeah, I don't have an employee in that state. I'm not necessarily, selling a lot of stuff, but I also do, conferences, I do events, I do, road shows where I'm traveling around the country selling stuff at, farmers markets or what have you, or art, art shows and things like that, and if you're in that state selling, trust me, I mean, the state wants to know, and states want their money.
Oh
So,
yeah.
yeah, it just seems like there's just a ton of complexity there. And again, that's why you guys exist, and that's why your solution is so amazing. Um, One question that I kind of feel like maybe somebody in the audience is asking, and so I want to kind of ask on their behalf is this just for big companies, or is this for I mean small companies? It's like at what point, in a company's life cycle do they need to start worrying about this stuff?
Well, that's the thing. I have conversations with companies every week. I talk to 20, 30 businesses every single week. And one of the most common misconceptions that I hear from my clients is, hey, I'm a small business. We're only selling in a couple states. We're just wanting to have a conversation with you. We don't even think we need the software right now. And the misconception there is that even businesses in their early stages of growth or even pre-revenue can use our software in some way, shape, or form, right? Because even if you're just in one state, like I mentioned before, if you're dealing with Colorado, Oklahoma, Louisiana, states with all the local jurisdictions and complex taxing systems, you still have to determine how your product or service is taxable at each of those local levels, right? And you're still at risk for an audit if you're not doing things the right way.
Right.
With me being on the small to mid-sized business team, most of my clients are pre-revenue or just in those early stages of growth. And it's very beneficial to partner with a company like Avalara in those early stages because you're mitigating all the risk and liability over to us, right? It's like an insurance policy for sales tax. If you're prepared in the beginning, you have all your bases covered, you're compliant with all the states. It just takes that burden of worrying about sales tax off your shoulders down the road. Like I talk to companies sometimes who come to me and they're like, hey, I think we hit Nexus 10 years ago, but we want to get things right now. What can we do? They wouldn't have been in that situation if right from the get-go, they would have just started off with a system in place, knowing everything's being taken care of, right? So I think it's more about
Yeah.
being proactive in those early stages as a small business.
There are so many questions I have to ask you. This is again, I think people probably look at the topic of sales tax and go, "Oh God, please."
Oh, I know.
Anything else that I could talk about, that'd be great. But this is really good stuff, and it's really important stuff. And I know that there's been some companies that have been burned. They've been hit with penalties. They've been hit with interest, and then penalties and interest on top of all that. So it is something that has to be taken seriously. Um, I know you guys have a couple tools that you use to help clients assess, do they have a problem? Do they have a need? So maybe just talk a little bit about that. Just, sales tax risk assessments, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, for sure. So Avalara really considers itself to be a fully comprehensive solution, right? So not only are we providing the software to take care of businesses on a moving forward basis to make sure everything's in compliance, but we also look historically, which is a very important part of that puzzle. Because when I have discussions with my customers, the very first thing I'll ask is, do you think you have your bases covered? Are you comfortable with where you're registered right now? Or do you know where you have Nexus? And you want to figure that out first and foremost, right? You want to know where you need to be registered, where you need to be charging sales tax, all of those things, because if you're just starting out and you don't know all those things, it's not really doing you any good, because you could have a state come back to you 7, 8 years down the road and say, well, you should have been registered in our state 8 years ago. Here's your bill for 8 years worth of back taxes and fees and
Mm,
penalties and interest. So with our sales tax risk assessments, what we do is we go back as far as the business wants us to, and we can look at all of the historical sales and transactions, and we can actually determine where and when the company hit nexus, whether it was based on physical nexus, economic nexus, and then we can even go as far as looking into the specific monetary values of those transactions and say, this is what the tax rate was for your product or service at that given time, and this is what you're going to owe to the state. And then this is what it's going to look like with fees, penalties, and interest associated, which varies differently. Like in Ohio, where I am, it's 50% penalty, right? So every state's a little different. But on top of that, once we give the evaluation of where you have nexus and what the risk looks like, we give the guidance on how we think you should move forward with that state. You know, whether it's go ahead and get registered for sales tax, you don't owe anything there, you just hit nexus. Or if we look and see that there was a significant amount of previous liability, we say, well, maybe something like a voluntary disclosure agreement would be necessary to help waive some of those penalties and interest and fees and things like that. So we do the assessment, we go back as far as you want, then we provide the guidance on how to move forward. And then the software takes care of that moving forward piece after the historical assessment.
that's awesome. I want to go a little bit deeper on that voluntary disclosure stuff here in a second, but for those that are listening, I know you guys have a sales tax risk assessment. I know there's one version that's like kind of like the Cadillac version of sales tax risk assessments, and I know we actually have a link, and we'll put it in the show notes for a free sales tax risk assessment. That's kind of like the little mini version that will kind of give you an idea of, do you have a problem that you need to discuss further. So I'll put that in the show notes for those of you that are interested in taking a look at that. But let's talk about the VDA, the voluntary disclosure stuff, and also related to the example you brought up a second ago, which was, hey, if I had started out proactively from the very, very beginning, I wouldn't have an issue here. I mean, but let's face it, most small businesses, it's not a problem until it becomes a problem. They're not going to deal with it. They don't want to pay any money up front if they don't have to until it
Yeah.
becomes a problem. So you've got to deal with that sort of the normal behavioral psychology of most humans. Okay. But so that's just a little bit of the context for the question. Okay. So now here we are, it's 10 years. And now we think we should have filed, registered in a state several years ago. We should have been filing, we should have been paying. What does a company like that do? Is it just, hey, pay the penalties, or do the states generally understand that and try to work with you? And how does that just work at a high level?
Yeah, and the magic answer there is it depends, right? It depends on the amount of liability they have historically, and it depends on the state and how aggressive they are, right? And let me say first and foremost, it is so common for me to talk to small businesses who just didn't know the rules. And again, they make it very complicated. So that's completely understandable. There's all these different rules and guidelines within each state. How could someone possibly know all the rules if they're not already working with a partner, right? It's
Not a
very,
chance.
very impossible. So it's a common conversation I have, like, hey, we didn't know we were supposed to register. We didn't know we hit Nexus. We didn't know we had an employee when we had an employee 7 years ago, that we should have had sales tax obligations from that point. So it goes back to my job as a senior sales executive, is to assess what their historical situation looks like and say, hey, this is what should have taken place, but it wasn't there. Let's get you taken care of. Let's get things caught up. And then at that point, we look at the options. We say, okay, how far back do we need to go? Have you had any sales in those states where you've triggered physical nexus, for example? And how do we need to approach each of those states? And it really comes back to that risk assessment on how we need to get things moving forward. And that link that Brad's going to post everyone, it has significant value, right? Because with our Nexus studies, there's always two options. We have our base level assessment, which is called our standard risk assessment. It's normally about $4,500. And with that link Brad is going to post, those fees are all waived for you down to zero. So you get that assessment at no cost because VARC is one of our top partners. So definitely take advantage of that. Now it's going to go look back about 2 to 3 years. That's really the cap there. And it's very high level. It's going to tell you where you have nexus on physical nexus and economic nexus. Now, if I run into a situation with a customer where we need to go back further, or there's probably a significant amount of liability, then we look at a more in-depth risk assessment option, which is what we call premium sales tax risk assessment, which, as I mentioned earlier, this is where we're going to actually provide the monetary calculations of what you owe in each state, what it looks like with fees, penalties, and interest, and how you should approach each of those states. But I always say to my clients personally, don't let this scare you. If you have concerns about where you are historically and you don't know where you have nexus, we're here to help, and we're going to make that process as painless as possible, right? Because the good thing is you've recognized it and you're approaching it in the right way. You want to get things taken care of. Where companies get in trouble is where they recognize that they probably have some issues and they haven't been doing things right, and they just let it go, and they kind of want to run under the radar with that, because that's when states can come back and really get you into some trouble. So we'll make it as painless as
Yeah.
possible.
Yeah. And good stuff. And you don't want to put your head in the sand and just like hope nothing bad ever happens. It's
Because states are
because
auditing small and large businesses. Everyone is at risk, unfortunately. But
yeah. And to your point about the different states, like I know like Louisiana is crazy, with all the parishes, it's just really, really hard. And then like I've been in a couple different companies that it's interesting. I've been in a couple different companies that were trying to do things on their own before they chose Avalara. Okay. And so I've seen both sides of that, where we've gone through that VDA type of process. We've done the registrations, we've done the work, and we've also gone through, some sales tax audits as well from a couple states that were very aggressive and wanted more money. Quite frankly, that's all they're, that's what they're about. That's the Department of Revenue, collecting the money. But I know that from my experience, because I personally was hands-on in some of those scenarios, you guys were incredibly helpful. There's so much stuff that we don't know, right, as a business owner. And so the fact that you guys have expertise that can really walk somebody through the process, make sure that they're being taken care of, making sure they're filing the right forms, with the right period ending dates, and including the right dollars, all those types of things. It is just incredible. And just, I mean, I just can't even imagine how hard it would be for somebody to really, truly do that on their own, unless you're just going to go pay somebody, a very, very high amount, as a salaried employee, to go manage that on a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month basis. It's better just use you guys, because you do it better than somebody can do it on their own. So
absolutely.
so let's maybe just touch base on base on a few examples. Like I know you work with clients every day, all day, every month, every year. Any kind of client use cases that kind of stand out, or maybe examples of how people have maybe gotten themselves into trouble and you've been able to help them get out?
Yeah. I mean, there's many examples that come to mind, but when I'm thinking of the most common occurring situations that I deal with on a weekly basis, the first one are my clients who have exempt sales and exempt transactions, like my manufacturers, distributors, people using drop shipping, companies who are selling to exempt entities like schools, hospitals, government organizations. I feel like there's a misconception out there that if their sales are exempt, or they're handling these exemption certificates, that they have no sales tax liability, which unfortunately isn't the case. Right now, there's about 32 states that actually include exempt sales in their economic nexus thresholds. So even if you're selling and everything's exempt, you might still have the legal requirements to get registered for sales tax, file the returns, and anytime a taxable sale would come through, you would need to be charging sales tax on those transactions. So
Mm-hmm.
if there's any advice I could give to people listening, is that if you have exempt sales, just be aware that those are still counting towards your economic nexus threshold in most states. And just to keep track of that, because again, if you're not tracking that and a state comes back and you don't have the exemption certificates or you're not registered, there could be a lot of historical liability owed there. One of the other most common scenarios is going back to physical nexus. A lot of companies don't realize that if they have contractors or remote employees in 5, 6, 10 states, that that's also an automatic sales tax obligation, even if you've never sold a dime there, right? Because it goes back to physical nexus requirements. So if you
Right.
have an employee outside, you'll need to get registered there for sales tax again and keep track of all those things. Those are probably the two most common scenarios I run into. The third being just commonly, hey, we don't know if we're charging the right sales tax rate and we're just charging the most common sales tax rate in the state and saying, calling it a day, right?
Yep.
Which is another mistake because it could vary greatly. It could be exempt, could be 2%, it could be 8% on the other side of the street. A certain law might have changed. I'd say those are the most common conversations.
That's awesome. I'm gonna ask a little bit more on that, the last point you just made.
Sure.
Um, so here's the sort of like the peak elephant in the room type of conversation that we sometimes have to have with our clients that are using QuickBooks. Okay, whether that's QuickBooks Desktop, Enterprise, QuickBooks Online. QuickBooks, quote unquote, does sales tax calculations, right? If I've got a client in California and I sell them and ship them a product, there's the drop down list that says California tax. Um, you know, and so the question is that right? Is that correct tax or is it possibly wrong? And I'm spoon feeding you this answer. Of course, you're just gonna like hit it out of the park. But I think from a QuickBooks expert standpoint, QuickBooks software doesn't usually get it right because of all the complexities, and they're not necessarily handling it at that same detailed, granular level that you guys are. So tell us a little bit more about that difference.
Sure. Yeah. And again, I'm on the QuickBooks team, so most of my clients are using QuickBooks as well. And QuickBooks is not a sales tax program, right? It wasn't meant to just handle sales tax. They have that as an add-on feature. So what that means is it's going to all be very high level and generalized, right? It's not really made for companies who are selling cross-state or have very complex taxability structures where some of their sales are exempt, some are non-exempt. So you can think of their internal sales tax functionality as very generalized. That's the best way to put it.
Yeah.
Now, if you want to do things correctly, that's why QuickBooks partners with us, right? And why we handle more than a third of their customer base is because we want to get it exactly right. So we're actually taking a latitude longitude coordinate, calculating at the rooftop level based on the bill to ship to address on the invoices so that we're able to pick up the local sales tax rates, the state sales tax rates, and any type of taxability law or rule that might be applicable with the company. You also have, going back to the exemptions, they have a very basic exemption certificate management component. They're not validating those certificates or checking
Right.
the expiration guidelines or making sure it's the right form for the state or validating EIN numbers. Those are very vital components of the exempt world, right? So that's where Avalara also comes in and really manages those at a more in-depth level. And then, of course, we're handling the filings and returns and audit support, all these things that QuickBooks just can't offer. It's great when you just want to do a high-level observation of sales tax, but if you're actually wanting to be compliant and do things right, that's where we come in with that partnership.
Well, that's fantastic. And I know you already mentioned, like, being across the street. One of when we do some talks with you guys, I know one of the examples we bring up is, hey, I've got two customers. They're on opposite sides of the street. One was charged 8.25%, the other was 7.75%, but they were in the same zip code,
Yeah.
same city, same county. All the normal things that any intelligent person would say that they have to be the same rates is not exactly true. And that's just the wonkiness of zoning and everything else that's that states and city and local governments have come up with, to get more money out of this group and more money out of that group. And hey, the mayor's negotiating things for a certain zone and district, and so you just get all these weird exceptions. So yeah, the fact that you guys can do GPS level is really, really awesome. um,
Oh, yeah.
I want
Yeah.
to ask a little bit more about the exemption stuff, because I mean, you've already touched on it, but I want to go a little bit deeper on that, because I know you've got Indian reservations, right? I'm a wholesale resale shop, but who am I selling to, right? state government, local government, education institution. I mean, there's all these different things, but all I see when I fill out forms is it an E, is it an F, is it a G, is it an H, is it, what's the code, right? And all that stuff again is just such a mystery, I think, to most people. Um, I think you guys have a solution to that, obviously, and so talk about just the exemption certificate solution at again at a high level. What does it ultimately help a client with?
Yeah, that's a great question, Brad. And that solution is called ECM Pro with us, or Exemption Certificate Management Pro. Now, keep in mind, Avalara has more than 70 plus services in our portfolio, right? So anything that has to do with sales tax, we can handle. But anytime I have a client who's handling any type of exemption or resale certificates or have exempt transactions, I always recommend having the ECM Pro portion included with the software, because that's essentially where sometimes the biggest risk can lie when it comes to sales tax. Because if you're not collecting the exemption certificates from these companies, if the companies are just saying, hey, we're exempt, and then you're just trusting that and not charging them sales tax, it all comes back to being a very huge audit risk. If you were to get audited, you would eventually be held liable for those taxes. But
Mm,
let's say the company does give you a certificate. A lot of businesses just trust that what they're getting is accurate. And I've looked into our ECM Pro program when companies will upload their current certificates. I have seen pictures of dogs. I've seen pictures of driver's licenses. I've seen pictures of business license certificates. Because when companies get these files, they're just trusting that the business is sending them the exemption certificate.
yeah,
So what that ECM Pro system goes in and does is we actually validate the certificate. We make sure it's the right form for the state. We make sure the EIN number matches. Companies don't realize those certificates can expire too. They have varying expiration dates from 1 to 9 years, depending on the state. We keep track of those. We make sure that they're always up to date and managed in our system. And again, that takes all the risk and liability and it mitigates that over to us. We're responsible for those. And then the business just has the peace of mind of knowing that risk involved is just not there anymore. So there's a lot more that goes into managing those exemption certificates than companies might think. And even my companies who are selling to like government organizations, for example, or schools, they just say, well, everyone knows they're exempt, right? They're government or they're nonprofits. Well, it is common knowledge to most people, but you still have to have those certificates. So best practice is just collect those certificates from everyone to avoid the risk. And the ECM Pro does that as well. We actually collect the certificates from your customers automatically via email, and then we do the whole validation process. So it just turns that whole thing automated.
yeah. Now that's awesome, and I know that from personal experience, you know, being able to manage the exemption certificate stuff. Um, if you just have a one-off sale, okay, maybe I can deal with that. But I know that I think the larger use case, or the more common use case, is when I've got recurring sales to these exempt customers. They keep buying from me and they keep buying from me and they keep buying from me. And now I've got a larger exposure to make sure that I get that right. But the fact that you guys have the integration with all the e-commerce shopping carts, and WooCommerce, Magento, BigCommerce, all those different e-commerce sites, so that if somebody's coming back and buying from me, it's not only exempt that one time, but it's also exempt in the future because of how they've registered that exemption certificate with you guys. So
Yeah,
um,
exactly.
yeah,
Well, and going back to the functionality of the software, I did forget to mention that we are maintaining and validating those certificates, but it then connects back to the invoices. So the moment that that invoice is processed in your system, whether it's QuickBooks, a shopping cart, an e-commerce solution, we automatically know that that client's exempt and we know not to charge sales tax to that transaction. So it's automating that whole calculation portion as well as maintaining the certificates themselves.
right. Well, so one thing I haven't talked about, I haven't asked about, but I think it's again, it's a confusion out there, I think, in the marketplace, which is, we're talking about sales tax, but a lot of folks hear the word use tax, and that's another kind of a mystery. Like, what is that? Because like when you go to a state and you say, okay, I'm going to go register, oftentimes it'll say, are you registering for sales tax? Are you registering for use tax? Are you registering for sales and use tax? What's the difference? It's like, do I need to care about that stuff?
Yeah, and use tax is a lot different than sales tax, but they're all under the same umbrella. It's definitely something that you want to track within the business. So you can think of use tax as when you're buying, products to use within the business, you're going to be paying use tax on it. It's basically self-assessed. It's a declared levy on U.S. consumers. So when you're buying goods or services from out-of-state providers, you're going to have this use tax component that's tacked on top of that. You want to make sure you're paying use tax. And Avalara, our technology, has the ability to differentiate both use tax and sales tax. We have an entire service dedicated to use tax calculations and payments and things like that. It's called AP by Avalara. So we're able to handle both of those things. They both have use taxes, different rules than sales tax, and you want to track that based on the state's guidelines, but it's just as complex as sales tax. So again, if you're not partnering with a company like Avalara, where our technology is actually determining, is it use tax and what should that use tax rate be? And are you taking care of that? It's something that can be easily missed and just added to the liability of the business with sales tax compliance.
Okay, great. Well, so here's another question. I just kind of thought of it as we were talking about this, backtracking a little bit, but so apologize to everybody. So we talked about, selling in a state, we talked about selling cross state. What about cross border? I mean, hey, I'm selling products and I'm shipping stuff to Mexico, or I'm shipping stuff to the UK or Canada. Do you guys have solutions for any of that stuff?
We absolutely do. We have an entire cross-border department of Avalara. We work with more than 95 different countries. Right now, we have more than 13 international office locations, tens of thousands of international customers. And we handle all of the sales tax compliance components for each country based on their own regulations.
Mm,
So we'll handle
amazing.
the VAT calculations, GST, HST, the filings and remittance. We can even do an assessment at the country level. We can say, what are you selling? Do you have liability in these countries? Do you need to get registered and do you need to file? Now, let's say you do have international obligations. Our AvaTax software, which is what Avalara is really known for, that handles the calculations and determinations with that direct integration, within that very same system, not only are we going to calculate your US sales tax rates, but we're also going to do the international sales tax rates on the invoices within that same platform. And then we'll automate the filings and remittance, mitigating all that risk over to us. Now, the good thing is sales tax in other countries is a lot less complicated than the US. The
Hmm.
US is so much more complicated.
Sounds
So
like
in other
we've made it hard on ourselves, apparently.
we have. So international countries are pretty easy to assess. Are you selling digital or tangible goods? What are the values? And that would pretty quickly determine whether or not you have obligations in those countries. But we do automate that whole process within every country too. And Canada, we actually look at just like the US in terms of compliance. We handle the filings, remittance, we'll get you registered in the provinces, and it's all calculated within the same AvaTax software too. So we'll have you covered there.
That's awesome. You mentioned at the very beginning, like you're in the Ohio area, right? And so there's going to be certainly certain uh, people that are listening to this that are in the middle of the state, and they're like, I don't sell anything internationally. Well, not a problem with me. But there are some states that border. What you're in New York, you're in Connecticut, you're in Seattle on the West Coast, and you're up Vancouver in Canada, or you're in California or New Mexico. And so there are a lot of those states that border other countries. And yeah, I mean, if you're doing any volume whatsoever, it's probably something to take a look at. Does that sales tax risk assessment look at that stuff as well, or is it primarily US based risk assessment?
We do look at that. So our international risk assessment set up a little bit differently. It's more of a person-to-person interaction. So we
Hmm.
actually connect you with our international cross-border specialists, and they'll go through their own questions with you. What countries are you selling into? What is it that you're selling? Because again, we're looking at every individual country because they all have their own regulations on how they handle sales tax. Versus the US, when we're looking at a sales tax risk assessment, we can include every single state with sales tax, and we know the general guidelines to follow for that risk assessment, but every country is very different. So it's more of a unique country by country analysis, but it's still just as simplistic. We still make it easy and we're able to determine pretty quickly where you have liability there. So,
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, so our company, right, Vark Solutions, we're a we're an Avalara partner, of course. We're a certified implementation partner, which means we can also like do the setup and configuration. And I think it's just what you guys have done with your software platform is just so awesome, because even though sales tax is incredibly complicated, um, you guys have broken down the setup into very easy to digest things, right? It's where do I sell? What am I selling? That just the basic things. And so based on identifying where do I sell stuff, what am I selling? Um, it's you guys have the tax codes that get associated with all the products that are getting sold, and that's all that's ultimately where the magic happens, right? Is you've got this library of sales tax codes, and all the rules and everything associated with it is associated with that code. So if I get the code right based on what I'm selling, the tax is going to be right.
Yeah.
But it does take a little bit of research to figure out, okay, well, I'm selling this software, but it's a SaaS product versus a downloadable product versus a shipped product. There's all those weird weird exceptions. But if you can get the codes right and where you're selling it right, it's great. But I know you guys go even above and beyond that, because certain products that people might be selling have custom rules, right? I remember this, again, this is way back in the day, but I remember I was teaching a class on QuickBooks, believe it or not, in Florida, and there was a lot of folks that were like selling yachts. And I remember there was like this, oh well, if it's once it gets above a certain amount, what's charged at a different rate, and so the luxury tax, I think is was what it was called back then. Um, what do you guys do when you have, it's not just this widget that I'm buying and selling and shipping, when there are those kind of weird thresholds within a product?
Yeah, and that happens all the time, right? Companies have multiple different layers of complexity with what it is they're selling. And we always have a solution for most situations. Just as an example, we have a solution called ATR, Avalara Tax Research. And you can think of it as like a Google for sales tax compliance. And you also have a team of actual people to go to and ask questions, a team of tax attorneys and professionals for those more complex scenarios. I have a lot of construction companies that use that tool, or just companies that have a very complex item that they're selling, like food services, and a mix between brick and mortar locations and website sales, or just really complex items like healthcare industry. There's all kinds of different industries that are complicated. But that's a great tool to use just to give you that extra boost of confidence when you're making those decisions in the setup and implementation process, that you're doing that the right way, because that's a vital part of that process, right? Our software is only as good as the data that's put into it. So in that setup process, one of the parts, as you mentioned, Brad, is picking the tax codes for what it is you're selling. If you pick the wrong tax code, then we're not mapping it correctly, right? So that's important. But I don't want companies to get intimidated by that part, because we have the resources to help, whether it's just chatting with us, or if you need more in-depth help, we have an ATR that you can add on for the first year and just make sure you're getting everything right. And we strive to make the implementation and onboarding process as stressless and as seamless as possible. We have very self-service steps, that you could go through and you could analyze, the steps that you need to take. And then we have implementation on top of that, like VARC offers the implementation support, which we always recommend, because you want to get things set up properly in the beginning. But they're very easy steps to follow. And with your help and with our general Go Live team's help, we come together to make that pretty easy. So and if there's ever any questions or concerns along the way, you have resources to go to too. A lot of my small business clients will get intimidated because they've never touched a piece of software in their life or did an implementation. But most of my customers, I've been doing this for 4 years, are pleasantly surprised at how easy it all comes together and how quickly they're up and running, especially with implementation support. So.
Awesome. That's great. Well, so let's try to put ourselves in the shoes of someone who's listening to this podcast right now. They're thinking to themselves, I probably should have done something about this a while ago. I might have a problem here. Maybe I've been avoiding it. But now that I'm aware that there's a solution out there, what's maybe a first step, first couple, 1, 2, 3 steps that you would advise if you were, obviously you talk to small businesses every day. What are those second steps so that somebody can start taking ownership of this and taking control of it?
First and foremost, the first thing I would recommend is do that quick risk assessment, right? The link that Brad's going to provide, because that's going to give you, again, a high level overview of where you have nexus and where you need to get registered. That's the most important part, is you need to know where you have sales tax obligations.
Okay.
The second thing I would say is, do not be intimidated by maybe the assumption that you think Avalara is going to be way too expensive, or that the implementation is going to be too hard, or that your business is not in a phase where you even need us at this point, because our sole pricing structure is based on scalability, right? Which is why we work with small startup companies all the way up to Fortune 100 businesses. And the setup and implementation process is catered around people that might not know what the heck they're doing, right? We want to guide you through that process so it'll be a lot easier. But most importantly, in that group of things to consider is, we don't want you to run into problems down the road where 5 years from now you find out that you should have did things the wrong way, because it's going to turn into a much larger issue. So let us come in and just help you, at least guide you. I mean, we might even tell you, hey, you don't have sales tax obligations anywhere except for your home state. And that's fine, because at least you know. And when you get to the point in the business where maybe you need our help and you're in a couple states, or you just don't want to worry about sales tax anymore, then we can help you when you're ready. But the most important part is find out where you have obligations, even if you've been doing things the wrong way, and let us help you and at least get you started and covered in those beginning periods of the business, right?
Okay, that's great. I do want to follow up that with a question. So obviously the sales tax risk assessment sounds like that's the best first step. Click on that, go to the, fill out, just answer some basic questions, and hopefully get at least some general guidance. And then if you need more detail, or if you think you've got a bigger problem, then you can reach out. Um, One of the challenges that I think a lot of small businesses have is, especially with large companies, and Avalara is a large company, right? I mean, you guys have been around forever. You've got amazing solutions to not just sales tax, but a whole bunch of things. Um, you know, 1-800 Avalara, 1-800 big company. Is that the best approach, or what do you recommend for a small business, medium-sized company that wants some help with this stuff?
Yeah, that's a good point. So we always have our 1-800 number you can call in, but that's not going to be the best solution for you all, which is why a big reason why we're having this podcast, right? Is because you are involved with one of our top partners, which is Vark and Brad and his team. And the benefit there of being associated with them and them having their partnership with us is that they can direct you to the right people. And you can actually be connected with myself, or another rep, or a product solutions engineer, anybody who we think that you need to speak with directly, and you don't have to go through the hoops of calling in and then figuring out what team do you need to be sent to. Let's schedule this call, and you're repeating all this information. We don't want you to go through that. So go to Brad and his team, send in your information, do the risk assessment, and we'll reach out to you individually, and we'll contact you, and you'll immediately be set up with the appropriate person. Just makes the process a lot simpler, and you're not going through multiple people, and just makes the whole process go quicker as well. So.
Well, I appreciate that. Avalara is, has thousands of reps, right? There's lots and lots of reps, but I like to pride myself on in telling people that we have the best team. In other words, we have the best Avalara team that's helping us and our clients. And so, just to kind of reiterate what Laura was saying was, in our business, it's all about relationships. It's all about people. It's about caring about individual people, individual business owners, right? And it's hard to get that with a big company, without somebody saying, "Hey, can you talk to Bob?" You know. And so, when we work with clients, just as an example, we ask those questions. We try to ask those questions about, what are you dealing with, what are you using now, and we try to guide our clients on what they should be doing, right, within the software. But as soon as we recognize that, hey, this is a little more complicated than even QuickBooks is ever going to be able to do for you, and it's not going to solve the problem by itself, that's when we say, hey, let's get you in contact with our reps at Avalara. And I think what you guys do really, really well is you guys listen to what we say, right? And hey, we've got this client that needs help, and you find the best rep within your system, within your department, to handle that specific problem, because one might have more an exemption certificate problem, one might have a sales tax problem, one might have a business licensing issue, right? There's all these different things, but because of the relationship that we have with you and the rest of the team that we work with at Avalara, you guys can really white glove that customer experience, and that in and of itself is worth the price of gold, so to speak. I mean, because you guys really do take care of us, and you really do take care of our clients. So, as we get close to the end of this podcast, is there anything about Avalar we didn't really talk about that maybe you want to highlight, or hey, don't forget about this, anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things. Just to go back to what you just said about partners, though, Brad, Avalara really prides itself on taking care of our partner relationships, which therefore takes care of our partners, customers, right? The foundation of our business 20 years ago was founded on what we call our partner moat, right? We wouldn't be around today if it wasn't from the support of our partners and their customers. So we really do strive to give that white glove service. And when you're coupled with a partner that we work with, like VARC, and then they give you that direct connection to us, just know that you're going to be in the best hands because we truly value those relationships. If I could say anything to the people out there listening, it would be, don't be afraid to have the conversation. I know sales tax is a scary topic, and a lot of companies, please don't feel bad if you don't know what you're doing, because a lot of companies don't. If you have questions or concerns, let's address them. Let's talk about it. And if you don't want to take the risk assessment, just get a hold of Brad and his team and have a call with us. We'll talk to you one-on-one and just have a casual conversation and figure out what's going on with your business, where you stand with your current sales tax obligations, and we'll tell you how we can help. We want to make this as least intimidating as possible. We're the good guys. We come in and we just try to make sales tax fun. We try to take it off your shoulders so you don't have to worry about it. And we really just try to make it not as stressful for businesses. And we end up being a time-saving solution, a cost-saving solution. You're not having an internal person handle this manually, which is very risky. You don't have to go outsource to, the tax attorneys and certain CPAs or organizations where it might be a lot more expensive. So it's worth a shot to just have a conversation with us. You're not tied down to any type of commitment. Just chat with us and we'll tell you what you have going on and recommend the right services, and then we can go from there. But I think most importantly, if you're doing sales in any state, even if it's just one state, your home state, there's always a need for sales tax compliance. So just reach out to us and see how we can help, and maybe we can all partner together. So.
Thank you, thank you, and also maybe a point that I don't think I made clear earlier, and maybe this is so. I just want to get this out there before we end. So Avalara, you mentioned you have a lot of different solutions, and I expect we're going to have multiple podcasts talking about the different solutions that you have in particular. But what I want people to also not make the mistake on is, Avalara, you guys help with the sales tax calculations. Okay, that's one incredibly important component of what you do. I want to make sure that I'm charging my client the right rate, but it doesn't stop there, right? The dollars are getting paid by Avalara. Obviously they're taken out of the client's account or our company account, but you guys are paying the sales tax on a company's behalf, and you're doing the sales tax filings for those states, whether it's monthly, quarterly, annually. And I think you're also at some level, right, dealing with tax notices. Like if we get a notice from a state, we can forward those to you, and your department will do the research and figure out, was that penalty legitimate? Do you go back and fight it? All those types of things. So you guys do have a very comprehensive solution. So it's not just this software thing that we subscribe to and it does this one magic thing about calculations. I want to make sure people realize this is a comprehensive end-to-end solution where I can sign up, get it configured, get it set up, and almost kind of set it and forget it, because you guys are handling everything.
Yeah, that's a good point, Brad. So you're going to, if you decide to partner with us, you're going to have your Avalara dashboard that you'll have complete visibility to all of your information, right? And as I mentioned earlier, we have more than 70 different services, but what most of my small to mid-sized businesses purchase is what we call our standard tax compliance suite, which you can think of this as like the bare necessities of sales tax compliance. And that's what we're going to look at is sales tax registration. So are you registered where you need to be, and do we need to get you registered? But then there's three other components that are most commonly purchased, and that's our AvaTax software, which, like Brad said, we handle the sales tax calculations, sales tax determinations, and we track Nexus for the business. So that's something you're not going to have to worry about anymore either. So we'll notify you when you're at 80% of the Nexus threshold, and then when you've hit 100%. Then we have our service called Managed Returns, where we're taking all the sales data we've collected through AvaTax, and we're using that to file your returns for each state where you're registered. And we'll also handle the remittance payments back to the states, which comes with audit support. So like Brad mentioned, you're not going to have to deal with the states anymore. There's a place in your dashboard to upload that audit notification, and then we come over and assist with that process with the states. And then finally, we're handling your exemption and resale certificates and those transactions if that's applicable to your business. And if there's any other extenuating circumstances, we can always add on our other services. Like we handle 1099s, which I know that's a big season coming up, right? We'll take care of your 1099s. If anyone out there is familiar with Track 1099, it's now called Avalara 1099. We acquired them a couple years ago. And then the international side and all these different things. But those are really the most commonly purchased services. And like Brad mentioned, once you have all this set up, it's essentially sitting in the background and everything becomes automated. Can you imagine not having to worry about sales tax anymore? And you know it's just in the background. You can check in from time to time, make sure everything's good to go, but you get to focus your time and energy on other areas of the business and not worry about sales tax, which nobody wants to. So.
I love it. I mean, the stop worrying about sales tax, that needs to be a marketing tagline out there somewhere. So being able to sleep at night and not have to, wake up worrying about sales taxes. So Laura, this has been incredible. I really do appreciate you taking the time to be here, share your expertise. You guys have a great solution, and we love working with you guys, and we're going to keep working with you guys for years. But for those of you that are listening, I hope you enjoyed the podcast. I hope you got a lot out of it. If you ever have any questions about any of this stuff, whether it's Avalara solution specifically or sales taxes in general, feel free to reach out. Contact information will be in the show notes, and we just want to be able to help you. Okay, so thanks again, Laura, and we will talk to you and the rest of the folks that are listening here soon.
Yes, thank you for having me, Brett, and thank you to everyone out there who's listening. And I hope we're all able to work with you all very, very soon in the future. And have a Merry Christmas to everybody.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
There is a Solution for That is produced by VARC Solutions. This episode was produced by Ashley White and Aaron Riley. You can subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Watch the video version on youtube.com/There's a Solution for That. Or visit varcsolutions.com/podcast, where you'll find our entire podcast archive, as well as show notes, links to solution providers, and complete transcripts of every episode. If you love the podcast, please leave a review with your comments.